So to start off, can you tell me about where your family is originally from?
hmm Yeah, so I'm Armenian on my father's side, um, and both of his parents were from Turkey, but are Armenian and left during the genocide. I'm I kind of am unique in that my grandparents, like for my age, I'm 38 right now, and for my generation, a lot of people it's their great grandparents
Hmm.
who survived, but it was my grandparents. Because my grandmother was quite old when she had my dad, and then my mom was kind of older when she had me.
Mm.
Um, so I was in direct connection with my grandmother. She was the only grandparent I really knew and connected with. And I had a very strong connection with her, even though she passed away when I was 6. But I always felt like very, very connected to her, and then as an extension, connected to my Armenian heritage and roots. And I always like really wanted to learn more about it.
Mm.
Um, my dad knew some, but the interesting thing was it was more my aunt Charlotte, who lived up here in Hayward, who really knew a lot of our family history, and she was the one who passed it along to us. To be honest, I don't know how like much this would be the experience of other people, but at least in my family, it seemed like the history was carried on through more through the women than the men.
Mm.
Um, uh, and I think that was definitely true. Like my grandmother was the one who was able to share the stories of the genocide much more than my grandfather, who was like, I think, very traumatized. I know,
Mm.
very traumatized by his experience. Um, so in terms of like where they're from, my grandma was from Carpert, um, and her father was a priest. Um, he was actually like more Presbyterian.
Mm.
He wasn't like an apostolic priest. Um, but he, as a result of being like a religious leader, was one of the first to be rounded up and killed.
Mm.
Um, and my great grandmother, my grandma's name was Nevart, and her mother's name was Arusiag, who I never met, but my dad met her when he was a baby. Um, and Arusiag had 5 children, um, which included my grandmother. The oldest was a girl named Zabel who ended up running away with another family, but
Mm.
she, we think, probably ended up being killed.
Mm.
Um, and so my great grandmother had my grandmother and then 3 boys. And then she also took in an orphan. Yeah. And
Wow.
also her youngest son, my uncle Archie, who I actually got to know a good part of my life.
Mm.
I was in my 20s when he passed away, and he was like
Mm.
95. He was born April 14th, 1915,
Wow.
which was like 10 days before the genocide, official genocide date.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
she had like less than a month old baby, took on another child on and
Mm-hmm.
had all these kids, and she, luckily they had some means, so she had some jewelry. The story that I've been told is she had some jewelry and she sewed it into her skirt,
Mm.
and then she would along the way like rip it out and bribe people to get passage to the
Wow.
US with all these kids, and she made it. They first went to Greece and then went to Mexico and actually lived in Mexico for quite a while. Um, and then my grandmother and her mother, Novart Norusiag, ended up coming to California,
Mm.
Fresno specifically. And my great uncles, stayed in Mexico. And actually, I have family now that's like
Mm.
Mexican and Armenian that's still in that area. So, yeah, so that's my grandmother's side. My grandfather, Manug, the story about him is a lot less clear, um, largely because he didn't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do know he was heavily affected by it mentally. Um, and I mean, yeah, I don't mind sharing this, but it gets kind of heavy. Like he
Mm-hmm.
at one time like attempted suicide, and it was a lot for him.
Mm.
Um, he yeah, all I know is that he at one point enlisted actually in the Turkish army, I think maybe to like kind of pass, or I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but then was able to like secure passage to the United States, and he had to change his last name from
Oh.
Koyumjian to Smith, um,
Mm.
which is kind of funny to me
Yeah.
because it's like a very opposite like
Yeah.
sounding names. So, but yeah, so he changed his last name to Smith and was able to get here. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
Do you know what year that was?
I'm thinking it definitely wasn't as quick as my grandma got out here. I think it was probably, by 1920, but I don't know the exact year. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm really fascinated by the story of immigration on your grandmother's side
Hmm.
from Turkey to Greece to Mexico and then eventually to Fresno.
Hmm.
Did you hear any other stories about those times or the years spent in Mexico?
Kind of. They're like more about like how my uncles were really trying to make it there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they were actually like pretty successful businessmen. Like they started out doing like kind of like shoe sales and things like that. And then eventually one of my uncles, Kisog, he bought a hotel that was actually kind of famous, called the Hotel Caesar in Tijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually like in its day, like when he owned it, where like celebrities would stay, and like there's stories about like when Lucille Ball stayed there, and things like that. And yeah, so he owned that. My family actually still owns it. Like my cousins now own it.
Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it was a struggle, but they also, as a result, like learned, like my grandma, first language was Armenian,
Mm-hmm.
second language was Spanish, and third was English. And
Wow.
like, yeah. So it was kind of fascinating to think about like that whole mix of cultures and the way that the diaspora kind of played out for my family.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And do you know where in the US your grandfather came when he arrived?
He came through Ellis Island actually. So he started out in New York, I guess. And I actually am not sure. I'm guessing he probably knew people. Fresno was such a destination for Armenian
Mm-hmm.
immigrants. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many who were there. So I'm guessing he probably knew some people
Mm-hmm.
who had already got to Fresno. So once he got to the US, probably made his way to Fresno pretty quickly, but I honestly don't know for sure.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And do you know anything about how your grandparents met or what their lives were like in Fresno?
Um, I think it was when my grandmother was like, I think they married when she was about, I don't know, 19 or something like that. So I think when, in those days, especially Armenians, it was very much like arranged,
Mm.
especially like traditional old world Armenians. So I think someone was trying to arrange her, and it was like my grandmother knew somebody who was, or my great grandmother knew somebody who was in Fresno, and they sent a picture of my grandpa or
Mm.
something, and like, um, and so then I think that might have been too why my great grandma and my grandma came to Fresno.
Mm.
Hmm.
Wow. And did you hear any stories about struggles to assimilate or preserve culture during that time?
Yeah, definitely. Preserve culture. I mean, especially in Fresno, I think wasn't that hard because at that time it was like Fresno was quite segregated.
Mm-hmm.
Like it kind of still is now too. Like you kind of know where Armenian people might be, or where different communities might be. So, the culture was pretty strongly intact, I think, especially through the churches and, just the areas where Armenian people lived. There were
Mm-hmm.
like Armenian markets. One of the famous ones was Hanoians. And um, so, yeah, so I think the culture and community wasn't too hard to maintain, but assimilation, I think, was definitely a struggle. And I think my dad's generation in particular was the one that really was like kind of went from being, foreign Armenian to being like becoming white, kind
Mm.
of. Um, and so, yeah, so that was like, my dad told me some stories about like, being made fun of when he was younger. And then as he got older, it's like became not a thing as much anymore.
Mm.
Um, I know there were also like stories maybe before my dad was born, but my dad like held kind of a fear of like even like the KKK coming, because like that was happening in the early years of
Mm.
like Armenians immigrating into Fresno.
Wow.
Um, and especially when they owned farms, like, there was like kind of a drive to make sure they were not economically successful. So there was like kind of targeting of, Armenians, and um, not as much as like, you know, Black African
Mm.
American community, but it did happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think one other kind of interesting story, like for me, was when my dad was a baby, because my dad was born in 1940. Um, he was my grandpa had like some neighbor friends who were Japanese, and in 1942, when the Japanese internment camps
Mm.
started, my grandpa, like the Japanese neighbor, like came to my grandpa and said like, can you can you buy our piano from us? And my grandpa, I mean, he didn't have a lot of money. They were pretty poor. And my grandpa said, I can't buy a piano. I don't have any money. Like, and the guy said, just give us anything. Like, we got to get rid of everything. We're going to the camps. So my grandpa bought this piano for like $5, and we still have it. But I remember growing up with this piano in the home, but I never knew that story. And
Mm.
then as I got older, my dad told me about it. But then I just realized, like, I was talking to my dad about it, and we both were kind of processing it together, like how intense that must have been for my grandparents, like to have come to this country for safety, and
Mm-hmm.
this sense of like what happened in Armenia could not happen here, and then seeing their neighbors basically disappear overnight.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, and I actually have heard other stories about Armenians like helping out their, especially if they had farms, like helping out Japanese farmers to take care of their
Mm.
farms and preserve what they had, um, until they could come back.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, did your grandparents then and father grow up on a farm in Fresno?
No, actually, no.
Okay.
My grandpa was a barber.
Okay.
Yeah, my grandma, she didn't really work with. She like mostly raised the family and helped.
Mm-hmm.
But she actually did writing too for like
Mm.
Asbarez, which is the Armenian newspaper in the
Mm.
area. Um, so they were involved like more kind of, culturally with being Armenian, but like in terms of farming, I mean, we had relatives and things who owned farms, and
Mm-hmm.
Fresno is and was very agricultural. So yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Armenian newspaper. Were you aware from your father, grandparents of any other things that they were involved in terms of Armenian culture?
More like just kind of church
Mm-hmm.
activities, like, and my grandma was a member of the Presbyterian Church. My grandpa was a member of the Apostolic Church.
Mm.
So yeah, it was just kind of more being involved with things at the church. And yeah, just cooking, for festivals, and yeah, like just being really involved in that way.
Nice.
Yeah.
And for your father, did you feel like his sense of Armenian identity was different in any way from his parents?
Yeah, I think so. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, understandably so. I think it's, especially having survived the genocide, I think my grandparents were like both very, very much wanting to stay rooted in the Armenian community. And, I think it was kind of a survival thing for them. Whereas my dad, like I said, he's of the generation that was very much assimilating. So even though he, I think, always connected, like even to this day, like he'll say some words in Armenian, just like, because it's like that's how he best expresses it. It was his first language,
Mm.
so but still, like, overall it was definitely not the same. And I think there was, by the time I came along, like I desperately wanted to learn the language when I was a
Mm.
kid, and he like said he would teach me, but never really did, you know? And I just felt like there was just that sense of like, it's it's not as important or relevant anymore in his mind,
Mm.
you know? Whereas like, yeah, I just kind of see that as a huge sense of loss,
Mm.
honestly. But it's interesting as he gets older, he's becoming more and more vocal about like his experience being Armenian, and a lot of the things I'm telling you I didn't know about until I was an adult, you
Mm.
know. So, yeah.
Wow. And so, did your father stay in Fresno, or did he eventually move to the Bay Area?
Oh no,
Or
he's still in Fresno.
okay,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
And so then I'm curious about your own time growing up. Can you share a little bit about that experience and where the area was that you grew up?
Yeah. I grew up mostly I mean, I grew up in Fresno, and I grew up in an area called the Tower District in Fresno, which it's not like a huge Armenian community, but really there's
Mhm.
Armenians everywhere in Fresno. So, um, but yeah, but also like my mom was not Armenian, or Odar, as they say.
Mhm.
She was mostly Italian and a little bit of Irish.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so I never had a strong sense of like Armenian community per se. Like I didn't grow up in the church in
Mhm.
Fresno, which I think is where you get a lot of Armenian community. Um, and like I said, I mostly felt a strong connection with my grandma. Um, and from there, like because I loved her so much and had like this strong, just I can't even explain it. Like to this day, I still feel like a really strong connection with her, even though she died when I was 6. Um, but yeah, because of that, I sought out a lot more stories than I think some people would, having not grown up,
Mhm.
tied to the church or the community as much. So, like I said, my aunt Charlotte, she was able to share a lot of that with me, and saw that I wanted to know it too. Um, my aunt Charlotte actually lived up here though when I was growing up. She
Mm.
lived in Hayward,
Mm.
um, and had had a family there, and so we would come up here and visit her a lot. Um, yeah, um, but yeah, I mean in Fresno too, like Armenian people are everywhere, so it's like I always knew someone who was Armenian,
Mm.
like when I was in school, or when I was, I mean, in any kind of you know leisurely activity or like extracurricular activity, there was always some Armenian person that was also in it.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, but that's like very different from the Bay Area, like which is kind of honestly why I go to church now,
Mm.
like because um, even though I didn't need to go to church to feel connected to Armenian people in Fresno, and like now I do,
Mm.
So yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
And can you tell me more about any activities that you participated in growing up?
Like Armenian ones or just any?
Anything, yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, like my dad is musical
Mhm.
and I'm musical too. Like I now sing in the choir at the church here in Oakland. I also play the flute and I play the piano. So like music was something that's always been a big part of our lives. And
Mhm.
I think this is actually I'm realizing more and more how much music has such a big part in Armenian people's lives. Like, I mean, you can say that I think about any culture, but
Mm.
like, especially going to the church now and seeing how musical and dedicated to music people are and how much it's just infused in the service. Like, it's the whole thing is music,
Mhm.
basically. And so, yeah, so I think I was very drawn to music because my dad was a musician, but also I realized more and more that that is actually a connection to my heritage too.
Mm.
Um, Music was a big one for me. I was also kind of a theater dork, like when I was a kid, but so I was involved with that a bit. I liked to write a lot when I was a kid too, and um, yeah, like things like that.
Mhm. Nice.
Mhm.
Can you share if you had any favorite Armenian foods to eat growing up?
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
one of my favorite things ever. I don't even know why, but like just pilaf and orange juice was like my favorite.
Mm, yum.
For whatever, I remember having that like a lot. Like I used to just love that combination.
Yep.
Yeah. And then my grandma was an incredible cook, but and
Uh-huh.
then she actually taught my mom, who was not Armenian, but my
Mm,
mom was actually quite a good Armenian cook
wow.
too. Yeah. So like my mom would make dolmas a lot. Like
Mm,
she'd make it with like cabbage and stuffed with like lamb, and my Aunt Charlotte would make like bereg, which I always go nuts for bereg, and
mhm.
and the other one was kufta, um, which is, I don't know. Have you had kufta? It's like a,
I think so.
yeah, it's like a ball of like cracked wheat with meat in the middle and like some spices, and yeah,
Um,
yeah. It was, yeah. Armenian food is just like, and there's so many good Armenian restaurants too in Fresno. That's the other thing I
mhm.
miss. Yeah.
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 And it sounded like you were around family in Fresno a lot growing up. Is that kind of fair to say? Or
Well, I was until my, like, because my grandma, when I was born, was living in Fresno,
mhm.
and then she passed when I was 6. So at that point, we didn't really have family in Fresno. And
Mm,
well, actually, that's not true. I had some cousins who were, like I said, I'm like very much the baby of the family. So my cousins are like, 25 years older than me,
mm,
but still, it was, I had them as a connection for sure. And then my Aunt Charlotte, who lived up here, like we would visit her a good amount. So yeah.
okay, yeah.
Hmm.
And how did your family celebrate any holidays? Were there any special moments there?
Not really. That was like, Christmas and
Mhm.
things like, and actually my mom would make Armenian food for holidays
Mhm.
sometimes. But she was also Italian, so she liked to make Italian food too. It was a very mixed and delicious like holiday kind of
Mhm.
celebration. Um, but yeah, I remember like a few times there's a place in Fresno called the Armenian Home, which is like a nursing
Oh
home.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, oh, and actually my uncle Richard, he's my dad's brother. He was a musician himself too. He's a professional musician. But at the end of his life he came back to Fresno to live in the Armenian home. And so we would
Mm,
go visit him regularly. And I remember going, we just had it yesterday at church, the blessing of the grapes,
mhm.
and like seeing people dancing and like, yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
That's great. So,
Mhm.
did you get to experience a lot of that specifically Armenian music growing up?
No,
Firsthand?
actually,
Okay.
I didn't know about it until I got older.
Mhm.
Yeah, I actually, oddly enough, I had a boyfriend who was not Armenian at all, but he was
Mhm.
very into music, and he's the one who introduced me to Armenian music.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's kind of how I like, especially the duduk, and um, it's just like kind of like an Armenian recorder or
Oh,
clarinet. It's
cool.
beautiful. It's made
Mhm.
out of apricot wood, and it has just
Mm.
like this beautiful sound. So
Wow. Have
yeah.
you been able to play it?
I really want to get one.
Uh-huh.
I was thinking about that today, like before you came. I was like, I wanted to do
Uh-huh.
it.
Wow, that would be
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Great. I'm curious if you can tell me about any cultural heritage sites that were in the area you grew up in, if you were aware of any.
Um, Not so much sites, but I feel like in Fresno, William Saroyan was just such
Mm.
a big figure
Mhm.
for, I mean, in general, but for Armenians especially. So, there'd be stories that people would tell. And like my dad even like has stories about seeing him riding around on his bicycle, like, near the area where I grew up. And, um, there's a theater named after him. And, um, yeah, just like him, like as a figure was like very prominent
Mhm.
in Fresno. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And can I ask, did you attend a college or university?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And where did you attend?
I came to UC Berkeley. So
Okay.
yeah. Hmm.
And can you talk a little bit about that transition and maybe how it contributed to a change in your sense of Armenianness?
Yeah. I mean, I don't I don't know if there was a big change at that point for me. I think Yeah, but I mean, I will say that it was significantly less connection to Armenian people in the Bay Area, other than my aunt who lived close by, so I would go hang out with her sometimes. Um, but yeah, significantly less. I didn't go to the church here, but my aunt, I knew my aunt she went to St. Bartons,
Mm.
so like, um, I knew that there was possibilities for connection,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew that there was like the Armenian festival that they do every year here. And I went to that, a few times here and there. But I didn't I didn't realize at that time, I don't think, like how important my connection to my Armenian
Mm.
ancestry was. Although I did like take some classes that were focused on genocides of like the you know 20th century,
Mm-hmm.
and largely because of being Armenian, and that was always the first thing they taught was the Armenian genocide. And got to know some Armenian students who were like pretty passionate about that, and yeah.
Wow. And can you do you pinpoint in your life a kind of a switch where you say that you have an sense of importance of your Armenian identity?
Yeah, yeah. I think, I don't know. So I started practicing meditation in like 2013 or so. And the more I did that, the more I got to know, like, I think my internal world better. And I think that, and a lot of like meditation is kind of focused on love, really, like, and getting connected to what ways in which like you can generate and focus on being a source of love for yourself and the world. So when I started doing that, like, one of the encouragements is to think about a time when you felt like unconditionally loved. And the first thing that came to mind was my grandma, like,
Mm.
and just how safe and loved I felt with her. And then from there, I started just wondering more, like, wow, a lot of people felt that way about her. They just felt she was just this amazing, warm, loving. She was also a character, but she was like,
Mhm.
this incredible woman. Like, and I just realized, like, I think it just started dawning on me, like, wow, to be like that after all that she experienced,
Mm.
to like be this source of like love and hope and light for people after surviving a genocide, losing her father and her sister, and you know, she was 13 years old herself. And honestly, I mean, the danger of being that age during the genocide as a
Mhm.
young girl, like, a lot of girls were abducted into like sexual slavery. So I just think about like all of that she carried, and still was able to be this like influential person in our community who people just like loved, and that I felt that love as a child. I think from there, that's when I really started getting curious more about how she did that, really, because it's like, as I was learning to meditate and trying to
Mhm.
generate that sense of love and compassion and everything in myself, it was so hard at times. And then I was like, well, if she did it, like,
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
so how can I learn more about how that worked?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And can you share more about how that exploration went for you once you were sort of more intrigued about your Armenian identity and this sense of love and compassion?
Yeah. I mean, definitely it started out with like kind of more book learning, and but from there, like, because I was like also meditating and trying to learn about it from, I think I just started like having these like kind of imaginations of what it was
Mm.
like, you know, to be her and to survive. And so I started like doing some writing about it, kind of like, and I wrote a poem at one point that was basically like a conversation with my
Mm.
grandma, and asking her, like, after all you've been through, how did you still choose love, you know?
Mm. Wow. And I'm also curious when you started getting involved in the church here.
Hmm. Yeah, so it was actually last year. Um it was I lived in Oakland for a long time after I
Mhm.
graduated from Berkeley. I moved to Oakland in 2010 and was here until 2022. Then I went to grad school in New York,
Mm.
um, and got my degree there. I'm a social worker.
Mhm.
And then I came back. And part of the reason I came back, so I went to Columbia,
Mm.
um, which was it was a cool experience in a lot of ways, but it was also intense because I graduated last year when all the protests and
Mm.
it was getting intense. But I also, you know, sorry if this is getting too political or anything, but I have a strong affinity for Gaza and
Mhm.
for, what the genocide they're experiencing. Um, and so yeah, so I just, when I came back to like live and work here, um, I went to the Armenian festival
Mm.
at the church in October, and Father Krikor, who's the priest, he gave this really beautiful prayer, and he prayed specifically for Gaza.
Mm.
Um, and I was actually kind of honestly a little surprised. I mean, I didn't know much about Father Krikor at that point, um, but the fact that he was
Mm.
speaking very boldly, like for Gazans, and I know Armenians are. I think a lot of Armenians have an affinity for Palestinians, but like I think it's also mixed
Mhm.
in terms of perspectives on what's going on there. So it was kind of, I really respected him and appreciated
Mm.
him for having just such a loving, connected, compassionate prayer for Gazans, like, unapologetic. And I know he has compassion and love for Israelis too and what happened on October 7th, but I think he was realizing in that moment and where we are now, like the plight of the Gazans is very tied to the Armenian people. Um, so I really was like, wow, maybe I'll go to church.
Wow, yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I mean, if this is what the priest is saying and this is what the values he
Mm.
espouses, I think I could I could be in line with this, and I want to
Wow.
connect more with Armenian people right now. So
Mhm.
yeah,
And what has that community meant for you since then?
it's been amazing. So one of the things is like, so like I said, I'm a social worker,
Mhm.
and I'm actually a hospice social worker.
Mm.
So I work with people at end of life. And I don't think I realized, I mean, like I said, I'm a meditator and I'm involved in like kind of Buddhist communities in ways, which nourishes me in several ways. But I think that I didn't realize how much like spiritual nourishment I also needed from like an Armenian community.
Mm.
Um, and to be honest, I don't show this to Father Krikor, but I don't consider myself Christian.
Mm.
Um, I, but I very much respect his teachings, the way he interprets Christianity, and just the values like he espouses, and that I find a lot of people really embody
Mm.
in the congregation. So yeah, so I feel like it's been wonderful, to just connect with more Armenian people, to learn more about the culture. Like
Mhm.
they've had some really great cultural
Mhm.
events and everything. And and yeah, and just like, and also being able to be in the choir now, like I learning the language in a way, and
Mhm.
also having that tied to music has just been like really meaningful for me. And helping people, like, the way Father Krikor says it is, the choir helps us pray. And I just love that idea, because even though I didn't grow up Christian, prayer has been a part of my life always.
Mhm.
No one taught me how. I just always kind of had this sense of connecting
Mm.
to a form of prayer. So yeah, I just find a lot of beauty and peace and community in that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit. I
Mhm.
skipped a little bit of your own young adult life and work. I was curious if you could share more about your social work and getting into that.
Yeah. So I actually well, I studied history
Mhm.
in undergrad, and wasn't sure what to do. I also graduated from college during the recession, like in
Mhm.
2009. It was terrible. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and actually ended up working in tech.
Mm.
And I made good money at it. I was good at it. But I was not fulfilling for me.
Mhm.
Like, and that became clear pretty quickly, like within the first 5 years of me working in that sector. So I started transitioning more to like things that were fulfilling for me, doing things more, actually working in nonprofits based on, like, one was based on teaching mindfulness to kids in schools. The other was like uh, nonviolent communication and conflict resolution.
Mm.
Um, so I developed like a lot of skills, both like kind of running nonprofits, but also in communication. And um, yeah, it was kind of like a natural fit to become a therapist in a way. But I also experienced the death of my mom in
Mm.
2018. And that was like a big life experience for me
Mm.
that really, and like my own like coping with grief and like my grief journey, like really opened up to me like how rich that territory is and how unexplored grief is, I think, for so many people in our culture. And yeah, so I just like kind of found myself wanting to support people through grief. So then I like, was like, okay, well, maybe I'll become a therapist. And then from there, I learned more about like hospice work and like saw it in action at some points. And I was like, oh, actually, I think that's what I want to do.
Mm.
So that's what I
Yeah.
ended up doing.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry for your loss, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank
Um,
you.
I'm curious if you want to share any of the things you pulled with
Yeah.
during the interview.
So actually, this is from the church, from one of the artists at the church. I think her name is Alyssa Zakarian. Um, she's a really great artist. She actually does
Mhm.
a lot of things. She doesn't just do Armenian um, pictures, but this happens to be a picture of an Armenian dancer. I just really thought it was beautiful. I thought it was like, I mean, I've seen Armenian dance like in kind of this style and the costume and everything. So
Mm.
I was really drawn by it. So I wanted it. Yeah. And actually this is the image on the flyer for the festival this year.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. So, and then this is something a friend gave to me. It's basically a young Armenian girl wearing traditional Armenian outfit. Um, my friend she's actually lives in New York. Um, that's an interesting story. She's actually in her 70s. We met at a Trader Joe's in
Mm.
New York because she had a free Art Sock shirt on. And
Wow. Huh.
she actually was a freedom fighter in the 90s in Armenia. She
Wow.
she was born in the US, but she just was like, I need to go fight for Armenia. So she left and fought for Armenia in the
Wow.
90s against Azerbaijan. So um, she had a lot of stuff. She's kind of in the process of moving, so she just sent me a lot of her Armenian stuff. So it was sweet.
Wow.
She also sent me these. These are like different, like ancient kind of architectural structures in
Mhm.
Armenia. One of them is the cathedral at Echemadzin, which is a very
Mhm.
famous. This one here. Um, yeah, so I thought this
Yeah,
was.
very
I'm
nice.
still trying to figure out what to do with them, honestly, but I'm probably going to put them around. Um, yeah, and then this. So this isn't explicitly Armenian, but this is. It says steadfast hope, and there's like two different flowers here. I got this. So on June 8th of this year, um, there was a pilgrimage for Gaza, and it was basically it started in Alameda
Mm.
and went to the Berkeley Marina. And in that distance is not 22 miles, but they basically made it 22 miles,
Mm.
which is the length of the Gaza Strip. So this was one of the things, like we had this attached to us as we were walking, and it was, just a peaceful protest and kind of like a
Yeah.
solidarity march. So it was really meaningful to me because to me, it's, like I said, so much of what is happening in Gaza feels very tied to Armenia for me. And also just the marching piece too, and like doing something that was a stretch, 22 miles. I kind of started out and I was like, all right, let's see if I make it. And I did.
Wow.
But yeah, but I was also like thinking about like my ancestors, and I was thinking about
Mm,
the people. I mean, none of my ancestors went to the desert, but the people who marched in the desert during the genocide. And so that was like very heavily like on my mind
mm,
as I was walking. So,
wow.
and just the idea of steadfast hope, I feel like that speaks across generations and across struggles,
Hmm.
like that. So,
Definitely.
hmm
Wow. And now I'm curious to kind of wrap up on reflections and looking towards the future. Well, if you've ever been to Armenia or Turkey, I don't know if you have, or if you have aspirations to visit one day.
yeah, definitely. I always
Mm-hmm.
tell people like my next trip is going to be what I call a homeland tour, and
Mm,
like like definitely go to Armenia, but then also visit the areas of Turkey where I know my grandparents were
yeah.
from. I can't remember where my grandpa is from. My dad knows, but yeah, like visit those areas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then also go to Sicily, which is where my mom's family is
Mm,
from. Um, so definitely hope to do that.
mm-hmm.
Um, goal is like within the next 5 years or so. So
That'd
yeah,
be amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess just outside of that in your own life, do you have any long-term plans for the future?
Well, I mean, like I'm, continuing to work like on like being a hospice social worker, and I like so far that's like what I'm wanting to do, but I also do want to eventually have like kind of a therapy practice.
Mm,
I'm still working on getting my full license to be able to do that like independently.
mm,
But yeah, like I do want to do that. And actually, one of my friends, we went to grad school together. She lives in Puerto Rico, but like we've talked a lot about doing, therapy for people who've experienced, yeah, I mean, just like horrific, events, and like
mm,
refugees and like things like that, which I think is like something that is definitely appealing for me.
mm,
I'll have to see how it actually plays out, because I think that that kind of work is not, it's going to be kind of self-funded. So
mm.
I'll have to have like some kind of steady work on top
Yeah.
of that.
Mm,
But yeah.
that's very interesting.
Hmm.
And do you have any hopes for the peace and justice of the Armenian community or of your own community?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I'm really concerned about what's happening in Armenia now. Like I'm really worried that even the area that we do have that is like Armenia right now is, I mean, and Artsakh is just like gone from Armenia. Armenians have been there for millennium. So like, yeah, so I am very concerned about it. And I really hope that, I mean, Armenians can go back to Artsakh. I hope
Mm-hmm.
that there's recognition of the Armenian genocide, and
Mm-hmm.
that it doesn't, I mean, I do appreciate that Biden recognized the Armenian genocide during his term, but it also felt like a political move more than
Mm,
something people genuinely felt was like important. So I just really hope that people recognize the importance of like honoring truth and history and reconcile, and the other thing is like too, like I don't have like a deep hatred and animosity towards Turkish people at all. I know some amazing Turkish people like who do recognize the genocide.
mm,
I think it's actually like a detriment to, Turkish people too, that there's so much denial.
mm-hmm.
I think that once we can just like honor and acknowledge the truth and reconcile, there's just so much more possibility, because in so many ways we are the same people,
Mm,
Turkish people and Armenian people, just like Gazans and
mm,
Israelis are the same people and in the same land, honoring the
yeah.
same land and connected to the same land. So yeah, so that's my hope. But also like related to that, I do hope for recognition of all genocides, including the indigenous genocide here, um, both like cultural and literal killing of indigenous people in the United States. And I think that as an Armenian person, like to say that explicitly, like because I think there's like kind of this misconception that like genocide started in the 20th century with the
Mm.
Armenian genocide. And it's like, yeah, sure, modern warfare era, sure, you can say that, right? But I mean, we have to recognize the truth about what happened in this country too and
Hmm.
reconcile that. So, yeah.
Yeah. My next question for you is, how do you think the Armenians can best survive within the diaspora?
Mm. When you say survive, do you mean culturally or do you have like a
Yeah, in,
cult?
in the
Yeah.
sense of preserving their sense of Armenianness and
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah, one thing I'm glad you're asking this because one thing that's kind of sad for me is like when I've heard some Armenian people say like, "Oh, it's an inevitability. The Armenian language is going to die
Mm.
off," and I'm like, "No, that's not an inevitability,"
Mm.
And I, I would just be, I would just hope that people recognize that that's not true,
Mm.
um, and that we can and should like learn more about our culture and history and you know um, continue to teach and learn and explore, and it's like whatever that connection might be. Like for me
Mm.
it happens to be music, and I'm learning so much more about the culture through the music. um, and I think for the longest time, because I'm half Odar too, it's like this like, oh, I don't have a claim, you
Mm.
know, which was very painful for a long time. But the more I just kind of claimed it and really went for it, it's like the more fulfilled
Mm.
I am. So I just really hope that people too, no matter what percentage Armenian you are, if you feel a call to explore it, do, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, what does being Armenian mean to you?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Um, Honestly, I think, for me, a lot of it is related to like the genocide. And as hard as that is, because I don't want us all to be defined by the worst thing that happened to us, right? But I think in these days, like especially given so many terrible things happening in our world,
Mm.
like having that recognition of the pain of what we've been through, and also like utilizing that to move forward and saying like standing against you know things that that kind of contribute to that trauma, that horror, that sense of like instilling fear in people just for who they are
Mm.
and you know how they were born. I think to me like standing with those people
Mm.
and knowing what I know about um, my culture, my history, and my the resilience of my of our people and like my family, um, like using that as a strength to also like stand with others. Like
Mm.
for me, yeah, I mean a lot of that is what it means to be Armenian. Um, and also eating like delicious food and
Yes, of course.
that's
Okay.
always nice.
And can you tell me about maybe some of the challenges that you've faced with exploring that, both with kind of learning and preserving your own culture, and as you said, also standing with people in the modern world who are experiencing these sorts of struggles?
Yeah. So I think, like I said, like the being Odar piece and like not being full Armenian, like I literally have had Armenian people tell me you're not really Armenian
Wow.
because you don't know the language. You only know like you only know American culture and, all these things. And that was hard because like I said, that for a long time it made me feel like I couldn't claim that identity. Um, but yeah, but I think just like recognizing that impulse towards like I was talking about earlier with my grandma, like love and compassion and justice and you know um those kinds of things like really are what led me to explore more what it is to be Armenian. And I'm glad it was through that connection and not just kind of
Mm.
a default like oh, I go to the Armenian church so therefore I'm Armenian, like although not, I think it's wonderful that
Mm.
people have that connection too. But I'm glad that I found my own way through that, even in a struggle. Um, and yeah, and then the other question was about the challenges in terms of like standing with oppressed people. Is that
Because you mentioned how both of those aspects are kind of contribute to your
my
sense of
sense of Armenian?
Armenianness in a way.
Yeah, I think yeah, and that's kind of a harder one too because I don't
Mm-hmm.
think all Armenian people would say that that's part of their Armenian identity, you know. Um, but I think like for me, like I just don't see how it couldn't be, and that is like I said too, part of what I really appreciate about like Father Creekor and the church I go to now,
Mm-hmm.
because that sentiment is expressed, um, and yeah, and I think just also like the idea of like not forgetting and not leaving behind people. Father Creekor has talked about that a lot, and at the beginning of church service, like I don't know if you saw this when you
Mm.
were or but he like comes around and I
Oh yeah.
yeah, and then he
There's.
yeah, and he says, "May you be remembered." And that like especially working in hospice, but also like thinking about it in terms of like our history,
Mm.
um, just that sense of like the importance of remembering and importance of seeing and acknowledging the truth and people's histories and their lived experiences is like very moving to me and like a huge part of like the way I the way I orient towards being Armenian.